We're going to go ahead and get started right here on the top of the hour. My name is Celeste Prawl, and I'm the Administrative Coordinator for the Equality State Policy Center. And welcome to the People's Review Live, hosted by us. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit organization working to improve the lives of Wyoming's people through transparent government, fair elections, and thriving communities. Our event, the People's Review Live, is designed to help everyone engage with our government and keep up on important issues and debates. When we work together, we can ensure transparent government, fair elections, and thriving communities. This event is possible through the generous support of People's Review Live Leadership Circle members, Marcia Constell, Joe Albright, Joanne Skyam-True and Shane True, Mike Shanzi, and Kathy Jenkins, and an anonymous donor. If you'd like to become a Leadership Circle member, please email me and I'll drop my email in the chat in just a moment. And some housekeeping stuff for those of you that have never joined one of our webinars before. You can see and hear myself and the panelist, and you can drop your questions in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll get to those when we come to Q&A time. If you can't see and hear us, please let me know, and we will get that sorted. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Jenn Lowe, the Executive Director, to moderate tonight's discussion.
Thank you so much, Celeste, and thanks for keeping us all posted on how these work. I appreciate that. Good evening, and thank you to you, our viewers. I really appreciate your being here tonight. This is a conversation that I've been looking forward to for a couple of months now. I'm really excited to introduce the panelists that will be joining us tonight. This is just a high-quality group of folks that have agreed to join us and talk about a pretty sensitive issue. So thank you all for being here tonight. I'm going to introduce these panelists very quickly. I'm going to start with Stephanie Brill. Stephanie, hi. Stephanie is the founder and board chair of Gender Spectrum. She is considered a thought leader in the field of gender diversity and children. She is the author of landmark books, including The Transgender Child and The Transgender Teen. She's also co-founder and board chair of Reimagine Gender, an organization working with corporations, NGOs, legislators, and policymakers to open a world of possibilities for all people to realize their potential by addressing and expanding today's limiting concepts of gender. Thank you, Stephanie. Next, I'd like to introduce Jody Donovan. Throughout a varied two-decade career, Jody has thrived leading organizational development across fields and sectors. Jody has a depth of experience in operations, facilitation, staff development, training trainers, curriculum design, and risk management. During a decade of working at the Teton Science School as the Chief Operations Officer and in other capacities, Jody chaired the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, a lifelong learner with degrees and credentials from Colorado College, the University of Wyoming, and Yamnuska Mountain Adventures. Jody is committed to building systems and structures that support high-functioning teams. An avid climber and a backcountry skier, Jody also makes time to backpack and paddleboard with their family. They are a part of the Jackson Hole Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Collective and regularly support its members and other community groups with related work and projects. Thanks for being here tonight, Jody. And finally, I'd like to introduce Ammon Medina. Ammon is the Deputy Director at Wyoming Equality. They're a mixed genre writer. They received their MFA from the University of Wyoming. He believes stories help people empathize with human beings living outside their own experience. Ammon was a Norman Mailer Fellow, and his chapbook, Ragged Red Voice, won the Florence Kahn Memorial Award. His work appears in Quelly Journal, Western Confluence, and Black Renaissance Noir, among other places. Thank you all for being here tonight. I appreciate it. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Stephanie, who's going to provide a presentation on what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Perfect. Thanks, Jen. Let me just share my screen here. Here we go. And let me move you all over. Okay, wonderful. Hi, you can see my screen? Yes. Okay, perfect. Good. 1 second. All right. Well, you already had a good intro as to who I am, but I think what else is relevant is that I've been working in the field of gender diversity for more than 25 years now, which is much longer than it's been a debated hot topic. And the organizations that I have founded, and we work with people of all backgrounds and beliefs, and our work is based on the principles of just meeting people exactly where they are. And as a result, our non-judgmental approach has opened many doors for us. Let's see, we've worked with the National Institutes of Health, the CDC, National Youth Disparities Committee, the American Society for Adolescent Psychiatry, and we have a formal partnership with the National Association of School Psychologists and the American Psychological Association. I also run support groups, virtual support groups in Wyoming, one for gender diverse teens and adults, and also one for parents who are raising gender diverse children or children who are questioning or exploring their gender. So I'm going to do a high level, real quick overview of sort of what is gender and what is gender diversity. Usually this is a 2-hour training, so I'm just going to condense it into some high level topics. So why does gender matter? We are all affected by gender in different ways and to different degrees every day in our lives. And as a society, we ascribe narrow ideas to gender that limit all of us in both small and large ways, and often we don't even realize it. And that can get in the way of our ability to show up as our full selves. So understandings of gender are rapidly changing, and we are thinking about gender in ways that are really different from times even recently. Younger generations see gender as a more complex concept than older generations, and each generation views gender differently. But we know that youth in the US right now are far more comfortable than previous generations with people who don't identify as either a man or a woman. In fact, if we look at this slide, more than half of all Gen Zers know someone who uses a gender neutral pronoun. 12% of millennials identify either as transgender or non-binary, but really transgender people are more like 1 to 3% of the population, and that other 9 or 10% are people for whom the gender boxes just don't really work for them. And quite interestingly, almost 1 in 4 Gen Zers expect their gender identity to change at some point during their lifetime. I can probably assume that anyone here, at least over 40, did not think that their gender identity was going to change in their lifetime when they were younger. Maybe they did, maybe they already knew they had a different gender identity, but the concept of a changing gender identity, not something most of us were raised thinking about. So the breadth and depth of this current shift in how we understand, define, and express gender is impacting every part of society right now. And the thing is it may seem political by the way it's being represented in the news, but it is truly not political. It is personal. And so if we allow the discussion to shift away from politics, we all know that on a personal level, when we interact with one another, even with people who are different from ourselves, we all just want respect and kindness. And in fact, that's part of how we act and live together in a community. We treat each other well and we care for our neighbors. And that's why it's important to understand about gender diversity and take it out of this political football that it's become for some reason. So I'm going to share with you a bit of a different framework for understanding gender than you were probably raised with. And internalizing this and thinking about it can really help you understand this sort of newer moment in time. All right, so the framework that we use is based on 3 essential ideas. And the first idea is that a person's experience of, that's supposed to click there. A person's experience of gender is informed by 3 dimensions. And those dimensions are our body, our gender identity, and our social gender. They all come together to make up our gender. We'll talk more about that. The second essential idea is that each of these dimensions is a spectrum, and they are independent of but related to one another. The third essential idea is that gender and sexual orientation aren't the same thing. Now you might go, of course they're not the same thing. But think about this. Let's think about an 8-year-old boy who loves soft clothing, sparkles, maybe cooking, art projects, has a flair for the dramatic. Well, in this day and age, people think, oh, well, he's obviously gay. Actually, he's just 8 years old. We have no idea what his sexual orientation is, but we do know what he likes to do and some of his personal preferences. But by overlaying sexual orientation onto personal expression, which is gender, it all gets conflated. So we're going to take those 2 apart. All right, so we're going to start with those 3 dimensions of gender, and the first is our body.
Even the biological categories of male and female are blurred. We know today that not just the X and Y chromosomes, but at least 12 other chromosomes across the human genome govern sex differentiation, and at least 30 genes are involved in sex development.
So science has advanced far beyond what many of us were taught in school about biological sex being only about X and Y chromosomes. But our body is more than just our chromosomes. It's more than just our genitals. So even though most of the discussion around gender focuses on our sex that's assigned at birth, the gendering of the body is even more than that, right? It includes our secondary sex characteristics. And it also includes our own experience of our own body. But that experience is not fully our own because it's also regulated by the outside world and how others interact with us based on our bodies. Specifically, wow, this isn't working so well today. Okay. So how others interact with us based on our bodies. So society genders bodies and creates an entire package to go along with those bodies. And it's really a gender package. So which bodies are supposed to be more desirable and which are not, of course, enhanced now by social media and other forms of media. People evaluate theirs and each other's bodies down to the most minuscule of traits and assign both self-worth and a sense of gender to them. And for some transgender and for some non-binary people, there can be a sense of discrepancy between their body and how others gender their body. It might not be even how they experience their body, but how others experience their body. So not only does a biological model of gender sort of not include the natural complexity of biological sex, there are other important aspects of gender beyond the body and beyond how we interact with each other's bodies. So let's talk a little bit about social gender. So how do we really determine another person's gender? Well, although it's presumed to be inextricably linked to sex assigned at birth, we rarely confirm what's on someone's birth certificate or what their sex assignment is, right? In truth, most of us just look at someone and we interpret what they are in terms of their gender by gender cues. And when we're confused, we're like, what does that mean? Because we have an expected set of cues that we're looking for. So how we each interpret these cues and how we interact with them and the gender roles and expressions that come along with that and expectations, that's all social gender. So we have body, we have social gender, but that's not it. We ascribe gender to things, even colors, for example.
The generally accepted rule is pink for the boys and blue for the girls. The reason is that pink, being a more decided and stronger color, is more suitable for the boy, while blue, which is more delicate and dainty, is prettier for the girl. Trade publication, Earnshaw's Infant Department, 1918.
So obviously we know there's no inherent gender to color, but even the associations we have with gender and color change over time. So social gender also includes what society does to reinforce its gender norms. And there's a cost to these narrow constructions of gender, and that cost is to everyone. As we continue to assign gender not only to colors, but to ideas and to feelings, we limit the human experience and we limit all of our potential.
What's the hardest part about growing up for boys?
Hiding the pain.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah.
You aren't
Not being
seeing
able to
this.
express yourself.
Kind of makes you feel trapped almost because it's like you
Just
have
listen.
nowhere to go.
I have sons who don't want to open up to me. Why would you do the, I'm fine, it's okay?
It's easier.
Why is it easier? You're hurting inside.
You're succeeding as a guy. You're doing the right thing. We were taught at a really young age, don't cry, have no fear. You're like, okay, if I get through this, people will go, wow, that guy's really strong. He's tough. I was with my friend, just looked at me, started crying. And I really had no idea what to do because I've never had any guy at least express his just emotions towards me. He just said, I think I just need a hug. And I hugged him. And afterwards, we both looked at each other and we're like, we're never going to say anything to anyone.
When you cry, does it make you feel like a failure?
Oh, there's that sense of sitting there going, why am I crying? I shouldn't be crying.
Because it's normal.
I understand that it is normal, but it is not normal. That's the best way I can put it. And they all laugh because they know exactly what I'm talking about. It is normal, but it isn't normal. It is human, but it is not man.
It is human, but it is not man to cry. I'm sorry, whenever I use this particular computer, it shows
What's
the
the
wrong video. So gender biases are all part of social gender, and they affect not only how we view and treat each others, but actually how we view ourselves and what actions we might take as a result. From early childhood on, we are exposed to stereotypes that guide our choices and our behaviors in powerful but often totally invisible ways, even steering us towards certain professions and away from others. So, for example, girls and women are systematically tracked away from science and math throughout their educations, of course, limiting their options when they get to adults for what jobs they might pursue. But the myth of this math brain is one of the most self-destructive ideas in American education/culture. Research shows that there's no innate cognitive biological differences between men and women in math, but this myth that's based on gender stereotypes continues, leads to a gap in confidence, and also consciously and subconsciously, because STEM fields are viewed and classes are viewed as masculine, teachers and parents steer girls away from them starting in preschool on, which then perpetuates this stereotype. So there's so many ways in which gender impacts us that we aren't even aware of. So rather than a simple binary, social gender is also a spectrum, right? Binary ideas about gender and what girls are and boys are, and men are and women are everywhere. But a simple reflection reveals that they simply are too limiting and inaccurate. And for many people, social gender is how they express their gender identity, how they communicate it non-verbally to others. So lastly, we're going to look at the third dimension of gender, which is gender identity. So unlike the other two dimensions of gender, body and social gender, gender identity is determined by each of us alone as individuals. Gender identity is who we know ourselves to be, and it can be the same or different from what we were assigned at birth. Gender identity is something each of us knows about ourselves. It's not a choice, it's who we are. And within the framework of these three dimensions of gender, for many people, perhaps most people, this internal sense of self is consistent with the sex that they were assigned at birth, and perhaps even with the way they express it. But for others, it's not. The best way I've found to describe gender identity is the feeling you have about yourself when you turn out the lights, right? It's not about your body, it's not about how you interact with others, but you still know who you are. That knowing of who you are, that's your gender identity. So gender identity, like social gender or body, there aren't two fixed points, right? There's a spectrum of identities. And although most people might feel like they're a boy or girl, man or woman, and that includes some transgender people, they too may feel securely that they are a man or a woman. It's just that their sex that they were assigned is sort of opposite, doesn't line up from who they know that they are. Trans means across from, so their gender is across from their sex. But some people feel like they're both. Some people feel like they're a blend of genders. These can fall under a non-binary or gender fluid umbrella. There are many, many terms to reflect current gender identities. Everybody's trying to find the term that suits best for them. And then there are also people who don't feel like they have a gender at all. They may be ungendered or non-gendered. These boxes, all these terms, none of it works for them. They just don't feel a resonance with the system of gender. So there's so much to go into there. So I thought, okay, let's just watch this clip of a number of different people who fit under the non-binary category. And it's a way of showing that, remember how I said all the dimensions of gender are distinct but related? You'll see this as they speak about their experience.
There's a whole variety of experiences that people have that cause them to question, like, hey, maybe I don't actually fit into the definition of, you know, man or woman, and that there's something else.
Hi, I'm Danny and I identify as non-binary.
I'm Lindsay and I identify as non-binary.
My name is Fang.
I identify as a non-gendered person.
I'm Francois. I identify as genderqueer.
My name is James, and I identify as non-binary.
Non-binary is someone whose gender doesn't fall within the context of the binary that we set up in society.
I am not male, I'm not female, I'm somewhere floating around in there.
Non-binary means acknowledging a wider range of experience.
For me, it means that I'm not identified with any specific gender, like male, female, or other things.
It's part of a larger kind of goal of questioning these assumptions about gender and questioning why there only need to be two.
It gives me the freedom to express myself. If I wake up one day and I want to spike my hair and do punk rock makeup, I can do it.
Every couple of decades, some designer decides that men's shorts are, suddenly 5 inches shorter or 5 inches longer. In the 70s, if you look at what men were wearing, they were like Rockettes, like shorts were up to here, and now it's like get it, down to the knee. Non-binary is freedom from that whole game. It's like I don't care what the men's department at Marshall suddenly has decided that like men need to wear. I'm gonna go for what makes me feel more authentic.
I tend to say gender is dependent on context and point of view.
To me, it just makes me comfortable that I can just be this body that I have.
All right. So again, first essential idea is that there are 3 dimensions of gender. And the second essential idea is that each of these is a spectrum and is deeply personal.
There's a whole...
Sorry. And the third essential idea is that gender and sexual orientation are not the same thing, right? In discussing gender, we don't talk about being lesbian or gay or pansexual or asexual. And that's because these refer to a person's sexual orientation. Sexual orientation is interpersonal. It's about who we are attracted to, where gender is personal. It's understood in relation to our own sense of self. And yet, of course, as the language of gender expands, the language of sexuality has to expand as well, because who we're attracted to right now, the terms are kind of based on gender. So these 3 dimensions of gender are interacting for everyone. For every single person, how much these 3 aspects of gender are aligned with each other and in balance is referred to as gender congruence, and I refer to that simply as congruence. So it's what we're all looking for. Everybody, transgender, non-binary people, every person who has a body is looking for a sense of harmony within these dimensions of self, right? And there's times for all of us when our gender is in tune and we don't think about it, right? There's very little adjustment or alteration is required. But for other people, there are periods when one or more of these dimensions becomes inconsistent with their internal sense of self, and they need some kind of correction or congruence measure to bring their entire system into alignment, to a greater degree of harmony. We all seek this feeling. Everybody does. And yet for some transgender and non-binary people to seek that congruence takes a lot more effort than for other people. So we all learn the same rules about gender, but we also learn are the consequences for stepping outside of or breaking those rules, right? And those consequences and the rules are different for boys and girls. Girls are usually rewarded for both, for being flexible, for being good at boy things, but also they get, such as sports, but they get a lot of attention for being good at girl things. They get rewarded for being flexible. But boys, it's not so easy. They have one way to be, and there's generally not a lot of flexibility there. Despite this, more and more boys and men are saying, hey, don't box me in so much, give me some more room. But how each gender non-conforming person is responded to depends on a lot of things: their community, their age, their race, their ethnicity, their gender identity, their class, how many expected gender cues and behaviors they still engage in, their confidence, and their looks. But again, times are changing, and the more acceptance and understanding of gender diversity, the easier it will become for those who push the bounds a little bit farther in order to feel comfortable inside themselves without having associated stigma. So But finding congruence, it's not just about clothes. Social congruence is not just about clothes, right? It's about finding things you like to do as well. And so, although I mentioned that girls are rewarded for being good at sports and athletic, that only goes to a certain extent, right? Those who engage in men's sports or other masculine activities don't always have it so easy, especially if they don't have more of the feminine cues in their time off the field. But social congruence is about finding the ways of self-expression that feel right for you. We're all just looking to be ourselves. And so that brings me to another point, which is that transgender and non-binary people, we hear a lot about their suffering and their mental health, and I am not going to discount that. But it's really important to understand that they're not suffering because of who they are. They're suffering because of how they're treated and their own internalization of the stigma of societal views. You can imagine how difficult it is for a transgender or non-binary person to assert their authentic gender. It takes courage, takes confidence. And yet there comes a time when the negative impact of not doing so just becomes worth the risk. Being transgender and non-binary is not a chosen path. It's just who someone is, but that doesn't mean that it's an easy path, right? If gender identity is formed early and is considered to be innate, well, of course you need to express yourself. Everybody needs to express themselves, but doing so in Wyoming, not so easy. So again, trans and non-binary people, like everyone else, don't want to disappoint their parents. They don't want to be rejected by their friends or their family at work or their church. And so it can be really a conflicted experience internally to decide to self-express. So again, it takes a lot of courage. Parents also face discrimination and pressures for supporting their children when they are gender diverse. So not only the kids experience it, but their parents do as well, which we talk quite a bit about in our parent support group, just sort of how challenging it can be to be there and stand up for your child, knowing that who they are is who they are, whether society likes it or not. You're still going to love them, but that doesn't make it easy for other people to understand until you take things like this and take the time to pay attention. So it's important to note that some people will always find their congruence outside of expected gender norms. That's where they're going to feel most comfortable long-term. It doesn't mean they're trying to stick out or be disruptive. It means they're trying to be in harmony with themselves, right? They're just trying to be themselves. And being transgender or non-binary is not reserved just for younger generations. The same is true in our own communities. Wyoming is no different in this regard. Although more people may be afraid to self-express their identity in older generations for fear of very valid repercussions, there are no legal protections statewide. You can lose your house, you can lose your job, you can, not get medical care because of who you are. The national average of self-identified transgender people over 65 is about 1 in every 200. And that's what I see in our communities as well. So it's no different here. So for some people, changing their personal appearance and having access to behaviors and activities that they like is enough to find congruence. But for others, it's just the beginning. They might also need identity alignment. We all do. So another element of finding congruence for everyone is being addressed and referred to with the correct names and pronouns and gender identifiers. It's true for all of us. Imagine someone insisting on using the incorrect pronouns for you, or calling you by a different name, or assuming that you are a different gender than you are. It's disrespectful. And it feels so incongruous to us if we are referred to in an incorrect manner. And yet many transgender and non-binary people aren't afforded the same respect, despite them correcting and requesting or insisting. Why do we get to decide what's right for somebody else? So when it comes to body congruence, there are a lot of congruence measures that are available. We're not going to talk about that. I would just say body congruence is not a uniform fixed medical protocol that's appropriate for everybody, but it is an intensely personal process. It's a decision made inside oneself and in consultation with one's doctor. It is not political. It should be out of the public discourse. These are personal decisions. So just anytime you hear it being discussed as something to be discussed, realize, wait a second, I'm not discussing someone's medical rights in a public forum. This is not relevant. We've gotten a little off track here. So I would say that although on a personal level, everybody seeks congruence, harmony with inside ourselves, we all also want to belong. That is a human need. And so if we don't also create environments that are safe and welcoming, rather than ones of intentional or unconscious stigma and discrimination, there's no belonging. Creating welcoming environments is up to all of us. So research is clear. We know exactly what we need to do to create a sense of belonging. We need to create environments where gender diverse people feel like they belong. Gender diverse people need to feel accepted, and they need to be supported, to have others interact on their behalf when negative comments or actions are happening, and to both interrupt and hopefully educate. And then my time is almost up here, so I will say, what might you want to do as an ally to take away from this? I'm sure you'll hear more from our speakers, but I would simply say, take note of the words that come out of your mouth. Try removing gendered language when it's not needed. Strive for inclusive language. And apply this to everyone you interact with, not just people who are visibly gender diverse. Just take note of the language you're using. Share your pronouns. You can create a welcoming environment simply by sharing your pronouns. And it signals that you are a safe person, or at least that you are aware of gender diversity. And if you don't know someone's pronouns to use when referring to them, ask, and then take note and use them. So this doesn't have to bump up against your religious identity. You might be wondering how you can assist in helping transgender and non-binary people to feel like they belong if you don't feel comfortable with gender diversity. Maybe you feel like it's against your faith. It comes up a lot for people. And beliefs are central to who we are. It's okay to hold your own beliefs, whatever they are. But today we're talking about gender, and this comes back again to respect, right? Respect is central to a healthy community. You don't have to embrace or even support your coworkers or community members' identities, but it is common decency to show respect towards others in all of your interactions. So in the context of encouraging belonging, that means not othering anyone. What can that look like when it comes to pronouns? It means regardless of your beliefs, you're encouraged to use the names and pronouns that a person uses for themselves, and to do so without disrespectful actions such as tense body language or rolling your eyes when you use them. If you can't do this, then it means treating everyone the same way. For example, you might start using everyone's last names because that might make you feel more comfortable. You might not use pronouns anymore and use names instead. That takes practice, but it does work. You can use nicknames that are not gendered, or even terms of endearment that are not gendered, in a way that you can still show kindness and respect. All right, that was our quick overview. Thank you. Now that we have a shared framework very quickly about gender and gender diversity, we have the great opportunity to hear from both Ammon and Jody about their personal experiences, which I look forward to. Thank you.
Gosh, Stephanie, thank you so much. That was a great, fantastic presentation, very thoughtful, and I learned a lot. I especially loved what you had to say early on when you said gender is not political, it's personal. And, you know, that might not be what you take away from the headlines these days, but it is a deeply personal concept. So I appreciate you kind of educating and informing us. Next, we're going to hear from Ammon. He's going to talk about some of his experiences. And audience, we'd love to hear your questions. So if you have questions for panelists, please put those in the question box, and Celeste will make sure to read them to our panelists. And thank you, Ammon.
Thank you. I kind of just want to, I'm Ammon Medina. I use he, they pronouns, which means like either one is fine. Typically, honestly, my close people use they, and people at outside of my close group, I just don't bother correcting because it's more about me than it is other people. That is not true of everyone. So I just want to start by saying that every single person who is gender non-binary, trans, gay, you know, whatever, any identity that falls out of normative identities, they are living their own experience. So I am not a monolith. I do not represent the gender non-binary experience, and I speak for myself and only myself. So as I'm talking, I guess kind of do me the courtesy of not generalizing my experience and understanding that I'm talking about my own experience. I have been thinking about identity for as long as I've had the capacity to think about complex thoughts. And by identity, I just mean like the things that make up who I am to myself and to others. I know that I'm talking about gender identity, but I kind of want to talk about race for a minute. I grew up in Utah. I grew up a devout little Mormon, which is now understood as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I call them that now because that's what they've asked me to call them, a great lesson for people when thinking about trans and gender and non-binary identities. So, you know, growing up, I had a lot of people assume that I was not a part of their church. And that assumption was made because I had a single mother and I came from families who were not broken and were, you know, I lived in a place where other brown people were Catholic. And so because I was a child of a divorced couple and brown, then I was assumed to just be other. Also, upon reflection, I was pretty damn effeminate. And so like that probably had something to do with it as well. Throughout my life, people have guessed after my race. I've gotten Italian, Black, Middle Eastern, which is so vague as to be laughable, Brazilian, Mexican, but never Ecuadorian, which is ironic, but I guess, you know, people don't know about Ecuador. So there's this constant kind of demand by others to know who I am. And I've had to think a lot about like why that is. And I think a lot of it is a question of like, if I am like them. So for people of color, it's often a question of like, I've never been upset or annoyed by another person of color being like, you know, what's your background, right? Because the question, the subtext to that is, am I safe around you? Or can I be myself around you? For people who are not people of color, I balk at it because it seems to be more of a question of what assumptions they can make about me and what, you know, their past experiences can help guide them how they can be led to behave around me, you know. Oh, are you Mexican? My grandma's Mexican, she makes the best food. Or like, my uncle's light skinned. Or like all these kind of like, these things that help put other people at ease. So growing up, you know, I liked all the other things that, other boys liked. So, you know, dancing in sequined costumes alongside other boys in an all boys dance troupe that I founded, as well as, you know, many other dance troupes. I sewed my own costumes and pajama pants. I knit and crocheted hats and gloves and other things during high school lunches or in downtime. And a lot of people just assumed I was gay or which, well, whatever. You know, they want an easy answer for identities that they don't recognize, right? And so if you recognize a behavior and you say that is this thing, then it provides like a sense of ease for other people. And so I think there was a lot of people who purposely did not ask if I was gay because I was in Mormon land. And so I was around a bunch of people of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so they purposely did not want to know that or want to ask me that because it was easier to avoid that because that was not something you were allowed to be or not considered like a real, you know, thing. So growing up, eventually I kind of realized that, you know, for me coming about my like identity is that I wanted to be able, and I do like so many things that defy this easy categorization that boy and girl provide, right? Like, because it was boy, you know, I also loved playing football and tackling my friends into the snow. And as much as I liked dancing and clogging and, you know, putting on tights and shaving my legs and like seeing how effeminate, you know, and how beautiful they were. And so for me, it's more about that identity has been, I've arrived at my identity about gender non-binary because it helps me defy expectation. I don't want to be categorized as boy or girl or whatever. I just want to be Ammon. I want to be allowed to like and love the things I like and love and like the humans I choose to and who collide into my life. There's a lot of angst and gnashing of teeth right now about other people's identity. You know, I work with youth across the state and I work with queer people across the state, and it's the most violent time I've seen in my 4 years of doing this work. And I think it's about a couple things. And this really wonderful thinker, human being named Alok, who talks a lot about how it's about other people kind of hating us for, you know, our freedom. Like we've gone through all this work to see our own beauty and to like unhook from all these societal expectations, and there's this kind of like thought of like, how dare you, you know, have access to that thing. And he quotes James Baldwin, you know, who says, "I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hate so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they'll be forced to deal with their own pain." And it's so much easier to hate someone than it is to deal with your own pain. Every cisgender person I talk to has some sort of love and you know, identity that falls outside of these neat boxes that boy and girl, man and woman fall into. And they've been forced out of that. They've been trained out of that. And there's a long and lasting hurt from it. And I think it's so much easier to avoid that hurt and hate others for it. I like this idea, but I also have my own hypothesis, which is that other people's upset about my gender nonconformity has so much more to do with them than it does me. That men act one way around men and another way around women. Women do the same thing. And so when a human comes into the equation that is outside of all of these identities, they're left kind of flummoxed. They don't really know. They're unsure in the same way that queer identities put them. Like, can they comment on, you know, can they comment on somebody's body like they're comfortably doing in normal society, like settings? Can they only talk about their career lust for ambition? Like, how are they supposed to respond and act? And so I think with that kind of like thinking, I've developed a sort of sorrow for people who are cisgender, because they've kind of lacked that opportunity, that invitation to accept and love and see their own beauty that defies these neat boxes. And so like with my like last minute here, you know, my kind of like desperate plea is my like call to action tonight is that everybody takes a minute over the next week or so to love those things about themselves that they are afraid of, that would cause them pain, to take a minute and acknowledge and accept about themselves. Put on a pair of tights and marvel at your legs, you know, let your hair grow long and do something demanding of your, like, I don't know what butch people do. I'm bad at this one, but like, you know, go do something really physical and like take deep pride in your like physical body and all that it can do, and how like, you know, your armpits smell or something, you know, go see your beauty that you never allowed yourself to see. And I really believe that if people did this, then people like me wouldn't have to be crushed under the heel of that like fear of feeling that pain of not belonging. So I guess, you know, my real call to action is go see your own beauty so that you can see my beauty and the beauty that people who fall outside of gender normativity have. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Ammon. That was lovely and so personal, and I'm sure not easy to share. So I really appreciate your vulnerability and also, sharing that with us today. So Jody, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thanks so much, Jen. And thank you for being here. This is great. Stephanie, it's always so fabulous to get to learn from you. And Ammon, I'm really glad I asked you to go first. I love that. I love all of that. I love that we were on separate ends of the country doing really different things, getting different feedback for it. My name is Jody Donovan. I'm 43. I'm calling in today from Jackson, Wyoming. I'm excited to share a little bit about my experience. It's funny listening to the various lenses of gender identity, because I'm going to share how I identify, and I've crafted this message just so you can interpret me. I'm transgender. I use they, them pronouns. For the terms I'm comfortable with in a setting of unknown individuals is I'm transmasculine. Google that one. If I was alone in my room and the lights are off, I'd just say boy. I'm kind of your classic, my fully harmonized congruent identity as a child was certainly just one of boy. And then the forces around me that became very obvious around, like, I don't know, probably 6 to 8, somewhere in there, that just wasn't an option. I was not thinking about identity at all. I was mostly just existing and just like, oh, okay, I'm this other thing, kind of bobbling along. I found a lot of social congruence and just real connection with my body through, I was a real high-end tomboy and then through athletics, so played sports through college. And then that manifested, that I sort of moved into, it's sort of the extreme adventure kind of sport land. I'm a solo big wall climber now and a ski mountaineer. And what I find in retrospect is that in physicality and moving and in the coin being spinning is where I find that I'm not having to translate myself to my context. And that is just so relieving. So I really enjoy being active and not just like to get my exercise, but to be out and away. I'm going to Zion for a week by myself to hang on a big wall, and I'm like so excited for it. So my journey has been one of, I didn't realize that I was trans until like 2 years ago, when I'd been identifying as genderqueer I was doing all these DEI trainings, and it was really to like explain myself to my audience. Like, yeah, I'm a girl, but I'm this, I'm genderqueer. And a friend was like, do you identify as genderqueer? Because I do too. And I was like, yeah. And then we talked about it a little bit. And then I actually Googled it for the first time. And I realized like, oh, I'm like this other thing. And I'm not this other thing light. I'm like all the way. So, and then while you were like shaving your legs, I had like G.I. Joes and was like sitting in a bush with like a machine water gun that I found from a friend, like guarding the bush, like vigilantly. So I like thinking about that. So I sort of uncovered this part of my identity very recently. It's been amazing to I've always sort of dressed the same. So my gender presentation in a lot of ways has always been on the masculine end of the spectrum. And it was really enlightening to recognize that there was a place where I fit, even if I don't understand that in my existence, there not being like a trans community here anywhere near where I am. So I know it exists. I know that I'm there. There are other people like me, but I don't really access that too much. Stephanie, thank you for your work to bring us all together. That said, I have found just extraordinary body congruence through understanding myself as trans. I'm medically transitioning, and I will share personal information as a choice to kind of say what this means. Like when I understood that there was a thing called gender dysphoria and I read about it, it was like this, where I realized that my chest felt like I was just wearing a backpack on backwards. And I just felt like that's how everybody felt. And then all of a sudden I like couldn't sleep. I was like, God, what is all this stuff happening here? And as soon as I had top surgery, it was like gone. I am on hormones. I take testosterone, and people are like, what do you want to happen? And I'm like, I don't know. It's all kind of scary. Why don't you try going through puberty at 43 as a professional? But mostly what I immediately felt was just like this ambient buzzing just like went down, and it just felt like a little bit quiet. And so those are just some of the experiences of getting that body congruence that has been really foundational and positive. I will always have friction where I interact with other humans. I'm exhausted from translating myself to my environment. When I came out, I'm like very out everywhere. When I changed jobs and cover letters, I was on Jody's Grand Trans Coming Out campaign, where I literally came out to like 300 people in my personal and professional network and conversations. I'm very good at it. I have a background in risk management and crisis response. This is the journey I take you on. I say, I've been coming out as trans. It's going really well. And then you're like, oh, I want that. And then I say like, oh yeah, it's awesome. Like people have been responding really well. It's been really great. And then I tell you like, this is what I need you to do. I use they, them pronouns, and that's really all you need to know. And then people are like, yes, I want to be on that parade. So I have that wired. You can share that with friends who need to come out in all kinds of environments. If you need to come out, this is a PSA. If you're watching this and you're a human on earth, never say in a shaky voice, I have something to tell you. And then like do that only to your best friends. But when you're making the grand plan, you have to come out with confidence. I'm sharing that with this audience because we do a lot to make sure that I do a lot to make sure that I'm safe in my environment. And half of that is how I tell you the boundaries that you can engage with me in and how you should act. And in doing that, I'm taking all of these subtle cues to see if I'm safe. And I'm doing that to see, are you just a person, are you misgendering me because you're a person who's learning and you're uncomfortable? Or are you doing that on purpose? And then that's a decision tree for what happens next. And that happens for, oh, you looked at me twice. What does that mean? Does that mean that like, I shouldn't sit down to eat my breakfast here? Or does that mean that like, you like my Superfly shirt? And so this is, I'm sharing this because Jenn asked me to share what it's like to be trans in Wyoming. I don't really know what it's like to be trans in many other places, but here it is very much about risk management. And in this political context, I feel like I'm living very out loud and I'm on that edge. And I know I'm going to hit something. We all know it's coming. It's big and it's bad and it's ugly. And it's coming to a school district near you. And it's just a matter of what that retaliation will be. And I recognize that I have I'm grateful for the work of people like Stephanie and Ammon and the folks at Wyoming Equality to help to make this a safer environment. And that is 10,000% top of mind. When I think about my fears about what it means for me, every inch that I gain in sort of congruence in my expression, I'm weighing, you know, like a lizard brain fear of rejection, but then am I putting my family at risk? Or I know I am, but how much risk? I know I'm putting my son at risk of increased bullying, but how much risk? And is that okay? Am I putting my wife at risk? Am I putting myself at risk? And I know I am, but when is that transition from just fatigue and a bad time and discrimination to violence? And those are the things that from a straight up risk management spectrum, I do a ton of it. It's really hard to know in this kind of a volatile political landscape what those metrics are. What's the probability? Because they're just, it's changing so fast. And there aren't many of us out there who are out loud about it. So I'd say like being trans in Wyoming in 2022 is not unlike solo big wall climbing. You make a plan, you do the plan till there's a reason to alter your plan. And you sort of just like put a piece of gear in, step on it, decide it's good, keep going. And then enjoy the view. And that so far has been just like increased, you know, my being able to show up more holistically as a human in my most valued relationships with my family and friends, and then being more authentic in community here. So those are some of the pieces about being trans in Wyoming. I'll give a shout out now. Like I was going for a job, like had a job search in the middle of being trans, and I'm working at like a real ordinary place with no DEI mission. Like I don't think they have values yet. I'm going to write them. But they wanted to hire me as like, to remind you, I'm transgender and I'm medically transitioning. They're like, come on in, it'll be great. And it's been really fantastic. So I want to say for all the scary stuff out there, back to what Stephanie said, when we go, especially in the state of Wyoming, when we go back to Wyoming's real values with the people on the ground, really brilliant things are happening as it relates to community building and inclusivity. Thanks so much for listening and giving me an opportunity to share.
Thank you so much for sharing, deeply personal experiences. And I mean, it really is a beautiful thing. This has been just a very enlightening and educating conversation. And I'm so grateful for all three of you for joining us tonight. Some of the words that came to mind for me really are, self-awareness and fearlessness. I think you all have sort of demonstrated that you have a deep knowledge of self. And I'm not sure if that's anything that everyone else has taken the time to really experience. So thankful for you all sharing tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to Celeste, who's going to wrap us up tonight, and appreciate you for being here. And for those that attended virtually, hope to see you next month when we talk about Medicaid expansion. All right, thanks. Have a good night, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. I just dropped an awesome resource in the chat, an event on October 11th. With Stephanie. So go ahead and download that flyer if you want to learn more about that. And with that, I'd like to give a thank you to all of our panelists and attendees for joining the People's Review Live. The Equality State Policy Center is a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit organization. And as such, we rely on charitable donations to fund our work. If you're interested in making a donation, please head over to our website, equalitystate.org, or send us a check via mail at 419 South 5th Street, Suite 1, Laramie, Wyoming, 82070. Again, thank you to our Leadership Circle members, Marsha Constell and Joe Albright, Mike Shaughnessy and Kathy Jenkins, Joanne Skyam-True, Shane True, and an anonymous donor for making tonight possible, as well as everyone that's on this call right now. We really appreciate you, and we'll see you next month. Have a great evening, everyone.